Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Mitch Jones. I'm the Managing Director of Policy and Litigation at Food and Water Watch, and tonight I'm your host for our Livable Future Live. As people are still joining us, since we're just at the top of the hour, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. I see some of you have already started. We'd love to see your name, where you're joining us from, and what brings you here today. Now, for any of you who are new to Food and Water Watch, welcome. We are a national organization fighting for safe food, clean water, and a livable climate for all. We organize for grassroots activism at all levels of government, local, state, and federal, and we work to create the change and the solutions that we need. And for any of you who are new to Livable Future Live, welcome again. This is our monthly virtual education series. Each month, we focus on a different topic relevant to our livable future. Today, we're here just over a year into a Trump presidency, and we've seen all kinds of challenges that we're up against. We've seen remarkable cruelty. We've seen lawless power grabs, and we've seen repeated attempts to line the pockets of those with the most power at the expense of our wallets, our health, and our communities. The powerful corporations and oligarchs who dominate our lives want us to believe their vision of our world is inevitable, that there is no alternative. But we know that isn't true. We've seen people coming together to stand up against this corruption and this greed. We've organized people power to stop devastating rollbacks. We've defeated the Cancer Gag Act in Iowa, stopped data centers proposals in Pennsylvania, defended important rules protecting us from lead in our drinking water, and defended funding for school lunches. Standing on these victories, we continue to look towards the future. We will continue to fight Trump, and we will continue to win major victories in our communities. Now, each year at Food and Water Watch, we lay out our strategic priorities for the year. And tonight, my colleagues are here to give you an overview of those priorities, answer your questions, and share ways for us all to continue this fight together. But before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple of Zoom reminders and announcements for upcoming events. First, a few quick notes about Zoom. If you'd like to turn on your closed captioning to add subtitles to your screen, click Show Captions in your Zoom toolbar. We'll add instructions for that in the chat as well. Plus, use the chat box throughout the evening to share your thoughts and reactions to what you're hearing. The chat is also where we will share information and links, so keep an eye out for those. And as you'll see in this slide, there is a separate icon for typing in questions you want to ask our speakers today. So the chat box is for talking to other attendees and sharing and receiving information, and the Q&A box is for asking questions directly to our speakers. Now, we have set aside some time at the end for audience Q&A, and I will get to as many of your questions then as possible. And finally, we are recording this event, and we will share the recording with you in a follow-up email tomorrow. Now, about future events. Next month, Food and Water Watch is actually going to be taking a break from Livable Future Live. But please look for an invitation from our sibling organization, Food and Water Action, for a webinar on the midterm elections. Also, you can sign up for future Livable Future Live events at the link in the chat. Additionally, our in-person benefit, Against All Odds, Illustrating Activism, will be held this year on Wednesday, April 29th in New York City. Please join us for that if you can. But if you can't join us in New York, you can join us virtually on Thursday, May 14th for our virtual benefit, when we'll also be joined by former U.S. Poet Laureate Ada Limon. Now, I also want to take a moment before we get started to acknowledge that we are coming together in community today with a diverse set of backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences. but with a common belief in the importance of fighting for clean water, clean food, and a livable future for all. As you share your thoughts and questions in the comments, please make sure to keep them respectful. We do have someone monitoring the chat, and we will ask anyone not abiding by this request to leave the event. There are many ways for you to get involved with our work, whether it's joining our volunteer network, attending our events like you are right now, or supporting us with a donation. Thank you so much for being here, for showing up, and for your generosity. The work we do is people-powered in every sense. We don't take any corporate funding, so we are not beholden to their interests. Our people-powered support comes from people like you, so we can focus on the well-being of our communities and our planet. So thank you so much for the necessary support that you are contributing to the work we're all doing together. And with that, let's begin our discussion. Tonight, I'm joined by 5 of my colleagues, each here to present one of our top priorities for the year ahead. We have a lot to cover, so tonight I've asked each speaker to give just a 7-minute overview of their priority so we can have plenty of time for the Q&A at the end. As you are listening, please add your questions in the Q&A box, and I will get to as many as your questions as I can at the end of the event. Now, our first speaker this evening is Rebecca Wolf, who directs our food policy at Food and Water Watch. Rebecca is here tonight to tell us about one of our biggest priorities, fighting big ag handouts and big ag concentration. Rebecca, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mitch. I think our slides are coming up here. Perfect. So last year, there was a really hard transition of federal priorities from the Biden administration to the Trump administration. Mitch has really laid that out for you. But we were really prepared, and we acted quickly to defend programs like the SNAP program or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and conservation programs that support small and medium-sized farmers. So lots of programs. In 2026, we are going to continue organizing and fighting to oppose Trump's disastrous agenda. We're fighting against big ag handouts. We are pushing for a fair farm bill that actually supports a good food system. And we're also pushing for actual safe and healthy and affordable food. We're fighting big ag handouts, especially against 2 particular bills, the EATS Act and the Cancer Gag Act. The first would preempt state regulation of the factory farm industry. This includes bills on animal welfare, consumer protection, consumer labeling, food safety laws. And it's really an attempt from the pork industry to skirt state laws like California's Proposition 12, which creates humane standards for mother hogs. The Cancer Gag Act would shield pesticide corporations from health-related lawsuits by preempting state labeling authority. And this bill would really prevent farmers, workers, ordinary citizens from exercising their right to seek justice and hold these companies accountable for failing to warn them of health-related risks. And these include cancer. We've seen such a huge spike in cancer. The bill also limits EPA's authority to regulate pesticides and their labels. So we're fighting against these big ag handouts this year as industry tries to push them through Congress, through state legislatures, and through the courts. Now, the good news is these fights are building on victories that we've already won. Mitch mentioned one of them. In Iowa, our organizing team defeated a version of the Cancer Gag Act in the state. Now, over 150 Iowans rallied at the state capitol last year against this bill, and we brought 31 groups representing tens of thousands of Iowans, and we won. We built pressure and we won. We have also already halted the federal Cancer Gag Act and the EATS Act from passing through congressional spending bills, which the industry has been attempting last year and this year to try to push through. They have lost, and we are still fighting them, but they've lost for now. And instead, we have built a bipartisan opposition to both of these dangerous ideas. So we are pressing on this year. Now, just because the House Agriculture Republicans are continuing to push these dirty schemes, and they doesn't mean that we are going to stop our organizing for the future that we just know that we need. So in that vein, we are keeping steady on pushing for a fair farm bill, and that is still part of the vision to end factory farms. We're highlighting the Farm System Reform Act, our North Star legislation that would ban large factory farms by 2040, enact a series of market reforms that would make it possible for small farms to actually compete in this marketplace, and then provide funding to help transition contract growers to other more sustainable forms of agriculture. We're also pushing to break up big ag, just like Mitch said. So, grocery prices, they're at an all-time high. And a number of major agribusiness companies, commodity processing companies, food manufacturing companies, and of course, supermarkets or grocery store firms control every link of the food chain. So, we're working to bring back a merger moratorium legislation that would halt new mergers for food and agribusiness companies and also allow for an opportunity to actually break some of them up. So we'll drop more in the chat on that now. And again, we can do this work because we are building on our victories. We were instrumental in defeating the Kroger Albertsons proposed grocery merger when the Federal Trade Commission announced that they would actually sue to block the $24.6 billion grocery retail merger. Not only did Food and Water Watch provide extensive legal comments on those merger guidelines that then the FTC used to block this merger, many of which were actually adopted, but we created the space for this narrative by working to introduce federal legislation like the merger moratorium. So we have previously introduced it. We're bringing it back now even stronger. And at the state level, we won the passage of SB 85 in Oregon, the first legislation in decades to reform factory farm regulations in Oregon. And this bill requires a ton of really important permitting reforms and allows for setbacks between factory farms and communities. We're also pushing for safe, healthy food by holding the administration accountable. Food corporations have price gouged their way into filling our fridges with just unhealthy and unsafe foods. And we know that many parts of our food system, from chemical laden crops to disease ridden factory farms, and just a revolving door of food chemicals and food dyes, endanger the health of our communities. So we are advocating for policy reforms that actually regulate ultra-processed foods and food chemicals, as well as keep us safe from the threats of antibiotic resistance. There's a long list of harmful chemicals that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has to address that are associated with cancer, heart and liver problems, reproductive issues, and many more. There's also rampant overuse of antibiotics and other drugs meant to make animals grow faster, more cheaply, and for profit. So we know this work is hard. It's really, really important that we are defending against these bad policies and pushing for the future that we know that we need, not just what is possible in this exact moment. But again, we can do this because we're building on our victories and we work in really strong coalitions that get the job done. So just last legislative session, Governor Morrissey of West Virginia signed House bill that makes West Virginia the first state in the nation to pass a sweeping ban on synthetic food dyes that are linked to behavioral issues, endocrine disruption, cancer risks. And there are at least 20 other states, including California, who passed one related to school food that are considering similar types of legislation. So we're working in coalition to get that done. Earlier this year, we also, in a response to a petition that we signed and worked with Center for Science in the Public Interest on, the FDA banned red dye 40 from food and drinks in the US, again, citing cancer risk. So we are working on this work. It is hard, but we are also building the vision toward the future, which includes a sweeping piece of federal legislation that takes all of these things on. And so hopefully we'll be able to talk to you more about this year, but that is what we're working on. We will continue to push for a healthier, safer food system that is free from dangerous chemicals, pesticides, factory farms, and keep winning with your support. Thank you.
If I could get my camera on, there we are. All right, thank you, Rebecca. As Rebecca mentioned, we are continuing to fight on some of the most important issues to each of us in our day-to-day life, and we are fighting for the real change that we need in our food system to make sure that we all get affordable and healthy food available for all of us. Turning to another very pivotal issue for everybody, of course, access to safe drinking water. So our next speaker this evening is Mary Grant, who directs our water policy here at Food and Water Watch. And Mary is here to go over the ways that we'll be working to protect clean and affordable water for all. Mary, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Oh, thanks, Mitch. And thanks again for everyone for joining us this evening. This year, our national water priorities fall into three big buckets: safe water, affordable water, and local control of water. First, we are working for safe water by opposing Trump's attempts to roll back or delay regulations that will remove toxic lead service lines and PFAS forever chemicals from our water. Lead is a dangerous neurotoxin. It harms every major system of the human body. PFAS are lab-made chemicals that chemical companies have added to a variety of consumer products. They are called forever chemicals because they don't readily break down on their own, and they increase they increase your risk of a range of health problems, including several types of cancer. Together, we are working to ensure everyone has safe water by safeguarding these common sense protections against these harmful contaminants. The Trump administration, unfortunately, has already announced plans to gut PFAS regulations, and Congress members are seeking to carve out certain for profit corporations out of liability to clean up their PFAS pollution. We will oppose these efforts because we need to hold these polluters accountable. The health and well being of millions of people are threatened by Trump's dangerous deregulation agenda. While many of our fights are defensive plays, we are also keeping the momentum on to advance stronger protections. This year, we will continue to advocate for new water safety measures with a key focus on monitoring for nano and microplastic contamination of our drinking water. And together, we've already won amazing victories to protect safe water. Last year, despite the odds, our team mobilized quickly to defend the lead out of water rule, or the lead and copper rule improvements, from being repealed by Congress. And thanks to the incredible work of our volunteers, we won a major milestone in our Stop Microplastics Now campaign. In November, after a year-long campaign, 7 governors petitioned the EPA to demand microplastic monitoring. Our legal team found a special and little-known provision of the Safe Drinking Water Act that such a petition will compel the EPA, even under Trump, to comply, or it faces a high burden to explain why it won't. This year, our campaign team will mobilize to ensure that the EPA grants this petition and monitors for microplastics in our drinking water. You can take action right now to tell EPA to monitor our water for microplastics. We will put a link to take action in the chat box now. Another key priority this year is affordable water. We will continue to defend federal funding for safe and clean water. The Trump administration has proposed deep cuts to the EPA, including to outright eliminate the main source of federal funding for our water. Over the last year, with your support and working with our coalition partners, we have successfully defended these water programs from major cuts, and we will continue our defense over 2026. Our eyes are on a big water bill slated to move this year in Congress, and we will make sure they don't take away funding that communities need to make our water safe and affordable. As we fight back against dangerous cuts, we are using the Water Act as a guiding star. We continue to build support for this visionary legislation to restore full federal funding for water and wastewater projects across the country. Since our founding, Food and Water Watch has advocated for a trust fund to provide dedicated source of federal support for water improvements and to protect our water funding from the annual spending battles that happen every single year in Congress. And this last year has really demonstrated why we need a trust fund to help shield our water system funding from the whims of this reckless and dangerous administration. You can take action now to support the Water Act and affordable water for all by using the link in the chat box. And our last big priority is to oppose corporate control of our water. For years, we have successfully worked with our allies to stop pro-privatization legislation from moving forward in Congress. One zombie-like privatization bill, has returned yet again this year. So we will ramp up our efforts to counter the corporate water lobby. Big water corporations want access to that limited pool of funding for public wastewater systems to grease the wheels on privatization, leading to massive increases to household water bills and deepening our nation's affordability crisis. Our organizers are also supporting local communities as they defend their water and sewer systems from corporate takeovers. With your support, we are standing up to big water corporations to keep our water in public hands and affordable for all. So together we can support safe and clean water for all. Now I'll turn it back to Mitch.
All right, thank you, Mary. As Mary highlighted, we've been doing a lot of work since our founding to assure that we have fully funded water systems that guarantee that each of us can turn on the tap and have safe and affordable water in our homes. And I'll just mention that there is nobody in this country who knows more about the threats of water privatization than Mary Grant. Next, I want to turn to Jim Walsh. Jim is our policy director, and he's here today to talk about our priority of opposing fossil fuel infrastructure and data centers. Jim, thanks for being with us again tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch, and thank you everyone for being here. Uh, this has been a hard year for our water and for energy bills, for communities that are literally forced to live with pollution they didn't choose. It's also been a year that's proved something essential. When we stand together, we can stop powerful interest in their tracks. And today I want to talk about two defining fights in this moment: fossil fuel infrastructure and data centers, and what they really tell us about the road ahead. Now, across the country, people are feeling squeezed by higher energy bills, unsafe water, and decisions made far away from communities that live with the consequences. And what ties this together is a set of federal policies that keep prioritizing corporate profits over public health. And our work is about changing that balance and making sure people, not polluters, get the final say. Now, even as the climate crisis accelerates, federal policy is still entrenching fossil fuels. And we're talking about billions of dollars in subsidies and wasteful tax benefits, including for carbon capture and storage, a climate scam that locks in pollution instead of ending it. And these policies aren't abstract. They translate directly into hazardous carbon dioxide pipelines, risky injection projects, and these are real dangers for communities. Now, carbon capture is sold as a progress, but in practice, it's a scam that keeps fossil fuels alive longer. Hazardous carbon dioxide pipelines cut through communities. Dioxide injection threatens land and water, including proposals to inject carbon dioxide under our oceans, a process that will expand oil drilling off our coast. And too often, this infrastructure is paired with more oil drilling, not less. And that's not a transition, it's a delay. There's good news. We've stopped some of the worst of it. We've blocked efforts to let corporations pay for fast track approvals. We blocked attempts to let the federal government override states and force communities to accept dirty energy infrastructure. And this didn't happen by accident. It happened because people showed up and spoke out and refused to be sidelined. Now, let's be clear, this fight is not over. Corporate interests are still pushing to strip protections and silence voices and lock in dangerous infrastructure. In 2026, we'll keep defending the rights of communities to protect themselves from pipelines, from injection projects, and from pollution imposed without our consent. At the same time, we're seeing new threats that have exploded into the scene: data centers driven by AI and cryptocurrency. And these facilities guzzle water, they entrench fossil fuels and spike energy bills, all worsening the climate crisis. And communities are left paying the price while big tech walks away with all the profits. Now, last year, we became the first national organization to say what needs to be said, and that's really enough is enough. And we called for a nationwide moratorium on all data centers. And we've helped communities stop projects in their own backyards. This is a line in the sand, and our water, our energy, and our future are not unlimited resources for corporate exploitation. The challenges ahead are real and they're big, but so is our power when we stand together. Every victory we've had comes from people refusing to be quiet, refusing to give up, and refusing to let corporations' interests decide our future. Your voice matters more when we stand together. Keep standing together with us, because this fight for clean water, clean renewable energy, and a livable future is one we can and must win.
Thank you, Jim. As Jim mentioned, we have moved aggressively into the fight against data centers, which is taking place across the country. I think there's hardly a single state in the contiguous United States that hasn't seen an explosion of data centers. We've been working with groups on the ground As Jim mentioned, we were the first national group to call for a national moratorium, and we're anticipating in the next few weeks, we're going to see legislation introduced in Congress that would create a national moratorium on data centers. Next, I want to bring on our second to last speaker, who is Tara Heinzen. Tara is our legal director, and she is going to talk to us tonight about slowing Trump's agenda through the courts. So Tara, I'll pass it on to you.
Great. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. You don't get any slides from me. I'm just going to talk for a few minutes. Like Jim said, it's been a really hard year, and we're as busy on our legal team as we've ever been in the courts, fighting back against these egregious rollbacks to protections for our food, water, and climate. We knew this Trump administration would be different in a few ways than the first one, and it really has been. First, this administration came in armed with Project 2025, its roadmap for deregulation and more, and it has acted very quickly to implement that plan. Practically day one, coming out with a slew of executive orders calling on agencies to reverse regulatory protections, eliminate entire programs, gut their own departments, eliminate environmental justice concerns, and so much more. This administration has also been finding ways to cheat the system that has operated for decades by finding shortcuts and biasing the rulemaking process. So it's been cutting corners in rulemaking to skip right over public notice and comment, going straight to issuing final rules. It's also been biasing outcomes by considering only the costs of regulation to polluting industries and ignoring benefits of regulation to public health. So trying to get to the outcomes that it wants. And all of this really impacts how we have to fight back in the courts. This term is different also just because of changes in the law and to the courts themselves. As we know, after 4 years of Trump 1, the courts are far more radical than they were 8 years ago or 10 years ago. The Supreme Court is certainly no exception. But on the flip side, the Supreme Court has taken action under the Biden administration to limit when courts have to give deference to federal agencies. And that's something that we can take advantage of. This administration has also gutted its own agencies, the very agencies that it needs to carry out its deregulatory priorities. So this can work in our favor. For example, when agencies no longer have the expertise or the competence to enact their deregulatory agenda in a way that can hold up in court. So that's kind of the landscape that we're operating in. It's really different than it was just a few years ago, but they are acting at breakneck speed to enact many rollbacks, and we're involved in quite a few of them. So I'm just going to go through a few of them and a few ways that we're fighting back. I'm sure most of you have heard about the EPA's final action just today to rescind the greenhouse gas endangerment finding. This is the scientific decision from 2009 that provides the underpinning for basically all of our climate regulations under the Federal Clean Air Act. So that's a huge attack on protections for our climate across the board. The EPA has also proposed a rule to eliminate Clean Water Act protections from many wetlands and other waterways. It has proposed a Clean Water Act rule to limit state and tribal input on infrastructure projects that will pollute waterways in their states. It has proposed a rule and finalized a rule eliminating National Environmental Policy Act environmental review protections across the government. It, as Mary mentioned, is walking back and delaying forever chemical drinking water protections. It has also abandoned a rule to reduce slaughterhouse pollution nationwide, and that's an industry that's one of the biggest sources of water pollution in the country. And just tomorrow, it's going to issue 2 proposed rules to speed up slaughterhouse line speeds, despite the threats that poses to workers, food safety, and animal welfare. So a lot of these actions are still in the proposal stage. They're not final. We can't sue over them yet, but we are fighting back on many fronts. So we are defending the Biden EPA's oil and gas industry methane emission rules. The Trump EPA is trying to delay them and industry is trying to strike them down. We are suing the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission over approval of the Northeast Supply Enhancement Pipeline in New York and New Jersey. We're suing EPA for abandoning that slaughterhouse pollution rule that I mentioned. We filed a friend of the court brief in support of New York's Climate Superfund law. We're suing EPA for failing to protect water quality in Iowa and Ohio. We're challenging EPA's air pollution exemption rule for factory farms that keeps communities in the dark about what they're exposed to. And we're suing over violations of the Freedom of Information Act when we've requested information to shed light on this administration's radical agenda, and they're not providing records as required by the law. So even though a lot of what I mentioned isn't yet in the courts, and a lot of the lawsuits that we have brought are still working their way through the courts, what we do know is that across the board, legal challenges to this administration are working. Many actions by the Trump administration have been rejected by the courts, and they're going to continue to be. Just a couple examples, many key funding streams for climate projects and renewable energy programs and more that were frozen by the administration have been restored by the courts. Several other funding cases are ongoing. You may have read recently about a series of lawsuits around proposed wind projects, energy projects that the administration tried to stop in their tracks. And all of those efforts have been struck down by the courts, and those projects for renewable energy will move forward. So overall, I think it's really important to understand that this administration is throwing a lot at us, but it is losing in court far more than it is winning. The courts are still, despite being stacked in Trump's favor, a critical line of defense, and we will be in them fighting all of these rollbacks for the years to come. I'll hand it back to Mitch.
All right. Thank you, Tara. It's, of course, deeply important that we continue to fight back against the Trump administration in the courts. And Tara and our legal team have been winning some great victories in the past year and in the previous Trump administration, for that matter, pushing back on the administration's overreach and getting those victories, as Tara mentioned, even in the courts that have been stacked by Trump himself. So next, I'd like to bring on our final speaker, Alex Beecham. Alex is our Northern Regional Director, and he is going to talk to us about our plans for winning victories at the state and local level across the country. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mitch, and thanks everyone for joining. So yeah, it seemed like we should close with something hopeful and what people are doing to fight back. And there's a lot actually. So here in New York, where I'm in the New York office right now, actually, we're really excited about a new bill to place a moratorium on data centers. I think Jim did a great job earlier, kind of going through just why we need to stop these. What's really exciting to me is we think we have the strongest state bill around and that we just introduced a little over a week ago in New York. So it's really early days, but what's great about it is we have incredibly strong sponsors who are both committed to the bill and have a real track record of moving things through both houses. And the beginnings of, I think, a really exciting coalition of groups that can push this thing over the finish line. Obviously, when you're working on a data center bill, you're facing kind of the biggest money out there. These are the big tech billionaires that are increasingly control the economy. But we have a shot in New York, and I think this is one of the places you could really draw the line. So that's really exciting. Where that goes is unpredictable, but we're really, really psyched to work on that this session and to get that going. So that's been really fun. Similarly, next door in Pennsylvania, that as I think Mitch or someone alluded to earlier, they're building data centers kind of everywhere across the country, right? Pennsylvania could be kind of the epicenter lately. There's just a huge number of proposals kind of in every part of the state. And while, maybe later we will have a state bill there as well, what's really exciting that's happening there is there's just a huge groundswell of opposition, kind of town by town, community by community. And the one I think I want to highlight is Montour County. So just last week, we defeated a really massive proposal. So to give you a sense of the scale, it's 800 acres they were seeking to develop in this relatively rural part of Pennsylvania in Montour County. And what's great is that, after a lot of organizing and people showing up to town boards and doing kind of the very basic but hard work of organizing and turning out, they beat that back. The county just said no. And this happens over and over and over, right? Like we've seen it town by town in Pennsylvania, we've seen it across the country. The challenge, of course, right, is the scale of this stuff. So, nobody wants to live next to a data center. There's a very natural organizing opportunity. It's can we scale it up across Pennsylvania and across the country? But I think it's a really cool story because it shows that like there's a kind of fatalism, I think, as people think of things that are so big, like the data center boom, where the scale of the industry seems impossible. But when people come together locally, we not only can win these fights, we are winning them over and over again. So there's a hopeful thing there. So that's exciting. And then moving, I guess, also next door, although in kind of a weird geographic way, to New Jersey. We're really, really excited about our campaign there to make polluters pay. So this is really simple legislation, right? The concept is if you cause the climate crisis, if you create a mess, you ought to clean it up. And that's what we're trying to do there is make the biggest historical polluters pay for at least a share of the mitigation we're having to do right now, and we'll have to do more in the future to sort of address the impacts of climate change. As you might imagine, the fossil fuel industry doesn't love that. This is a big bill, but it also is one that we've won in other states. So here in New York, about a year ago, we passed and Governor Hochul signed into law very similar legislation called the Climate Superfund Act. Same thing in Vermont. So if we could do this in New Jersey, you'd have like a trio of states, and there's many more states across the country that are considering similar laws. What I think is really exciting about it, though, is that our team in New Jersey has built a really powerful campaign that truly is powered by the grassroots. And New Jersey, we have a big profile there and have worked a bunch of state bills over the years. It is a really, really tough nut to crack. It is a difficult legislature to move something through. And I think we've successfully made this climate super fund idea the single biggest environmental issue in the state and got very close. So, as folks on the call might know, New Jersey has odd year elections, meaning we just ended one legislative session and then just began a new one last month. We ended the session with a pretty good chance to get the thing through and ultimately failed to get it passed. We have majority support in both houses, majority of each house on the bill. And I think we've begun this new session not only in a stronger place than we've been on this bill, but I think a stronger place than we've been on any bill that we've been actively pushing in a really long time, at least as long as I've been working on New Jersey stuff. So that's really exciting. Those are all East Coast states. So I want to close with a note about Iowa, which is quite a bit different. So um, this probably isn't a surprise to many people on the call. Iowa's facing a gigantic factory farm problem. This isn't an accident, right? It follows years and years of a massive regulatory rollback at both the federal level and at the Iowa state level, which has been controlled by Republicans who are really friendly to the factory farm industry for years and years. Um, Unsurprisingly, there also is a water crisis in Iowa that's basically from those same factory farms. The hog industry is just enormous there. And what I think is interesting is our organizers on the ground in Iowa have found something that if you don't live there or go there, you might not expect, which is that water crisis really is the top issue for a lot of people when you talk to them and ask them, what's the thing you're most concerned about? If you don't live near factory farms, you might think of them as like a fringe, or not fringe, but just a left issue. That's not how it plays out in Iowa. People are incredibly concerned about it, and they're concerned because they're feeling the impacts on a daily level. They see them, they smell them, they deal with the water quality problems. So that's happened. Also, perhaps unsurprisingly, those same Republicans have rolled back funding for water quality monitoring, with kind of the basic thing being if we don't search for problems in water quality, perhaps they won't exist. They, of course, do exist. Cancer rates are rising in Iowa. The water quality problems are real. And what's great, I think, is that people are beginning to realize that and see we have to do something about it and rising up. So I think for the first time in a really, really long time, we have a real shot in Iowa to restore funding for water quality monitoring and water quality programs more broadly. That's, I think, really exciting. Where that goes, whether we win it, is very much like hanging in the balance right now. But I think it's such a cool story and in a place that you might not expect, again, if you're not calling in from Iowa. So yeah, I think that's it for me, but really excited about all that work and excited to join all of you. And I guess I'll say also, as others have, none of this stuff is possible, right? All this stuff costs money, it costs resources. None of it's possible without the support of our members. And I think that people-powered effort really is the way we have to win all these campaigns, but obviously it takes resources to do that. So thanks to everyone who's contributed either by donating or by volunteering. That's really what powers all of it.
Right. Thank you, Alex. As Alex highlighted, we are really active across the country and states on all of our issues, working to win victories at the state and local level, whether it's on data centers, factory farms, fighting water privatization, fighting for climate super funds, and a host of other issues that we work on. And as Alex also highlighted, these victories are made possible not only by our paid organizers who are on staff, but by the amazing volunteer network that we have, and by all of you who support us, who show up at these events, who are able to donate. So thank you all. Now, we've already covered a lot in the 41 minutes or so that we've been on, and I want to thank all of our speakers for their great overviews. And I want to thank everybody who has submitted a question either ahead of time or tonight. And we're going to be turning here shortly to our Q&A, and we're going to try to get through as many of these questions as we can this evening. And just as a reminder, we will be sharing a recording of this event with you in an email tomorrow, along with all of the links and resources that we're sharing tonight. And I invite you all to continue this conversation and to continue engaging in each of these priorities with us throughout this coming year. So let's bring everybody back on if they aren't already. There we go. All right. So let's get to some questions. We've had a few pre-submitted questions, and so I'm going to start with some of those. Tara, you touched on your overview on last week's repeal of the climate endangerment finding, which serves really as the basis for federal climate action. So how are we going to fight back against this, Tara? What's the plan for taking on the Trump administration's attack on the endangerment finding?
Yeah, this is a big one. I mean, ultimately, this is a fight that's going to be fought in the courts, and we fully intend to be part of that fight. What EPA did with repealing its endangerment finding is make a legal determination about what is allowed under the Clean Air Act, a federal law that the endangerment finding was under. What it did not do is try to call into question the scientific consensus around the harms of climate change and the reality of climate change. So that will mean that ultimately this will be a question of how to interpret the Clean Air Act, not relitigating climate science, and that will play out in the courts. But of course, we can also fight back by trying to hold climate polluters accountable through climate superfund laws and supporting other state and local efforts to hold corporations accountable under things like consumer protection laws. And there's a lot of really creative litigation happening to hold climate polluters accountable that isn't based on the Clean Air Act. So it will take a range of strategies, but restoring the endangerment finding is crucial to ultimately bringing down climate emissions. The Clean Air Act is the main statute we have, and if we don't fight this in the courts, we need Congress to act. So it's going to be a multifaceted approach.
All right. Thank you, Tara. Did anybody have anything else they wanted to add? I think at the moment, as Tara mentioned, this is a legal battle, but also, of course, we will be writing about it and talking about it and educating folks about the importance of making sure that the basis for climate action is restored. And also it doesn't prohibit states from taking climate action, which I think is an important point. We've also had several questions prior to this evening from folks about, and also this evening, I noticed some about microplastics, PFAS, toxins in our water. So, Mary, what folks seem to want to know is how we can help to protect ourselves from these pollutants in our water.
Well, that's a great question. So PFAS are widespread in consumer products. Anything that's non-stick, waterproof, like pans, mascara, heat resistance, Likely there's PFAS in them. When they phase out the old PFAS, they add a new PFAS. New PFAS are being approved by Trump's EPA like almost every week. Fortunately, our research team did put together a guide to help you protect yourself from PFAS in your daily life, kind of like a guide to consumer products. So I'm going to put a link in the chat box right now for our consumer guide that everyone can check out. So for drinking water, the first thing to do is to check your water utilities, if you're on a water system, your annual water quality report. And in that report, because PFAS are on the monitoring roll, the last cycle, you should see the levels of certain types of PFAS in your water. And if you see levels of PFAS in your water, the best way to reduce your exposure to PFAS is with a reverse osmosis filter. Unfortunately, this is typically a really expensive kind of filter. It's different than a regular faucet filter or refrigerator filter. And that's why we really want to protect strong regulations so that our utilities can update treatment plants at the community level. And more, we need to prevent pollution in the first place, stop, introducing PFAS into our water supplies. So for microplastics are an emerging threat, but like the single simplest way to reduce your exposure to microplastics, avoid plastic bottled water. By far, that's the easiest thing you can do. Choose tap water over bottled water. You can also avoid heating your food in plastic. Combined with plastic is kind of a recipe for microplastics and nanoplastic exposure. So we also have more tips on our website. So I'm going to put a link to 5 ways to avoid eating and drinking microplastics right now in the chat box for more information.
Great, thank you, Mary. And those links should be included in the email that you'll all receive tomorrow as part of the resources from this evening. All right, so we have time for at least one more question. This was asked in the Q&A box. A version of this was asked. Given Trump and Bobby Kennedy, how is it that we're actually going to be able to make some progress and get some wins? And I'm going to go first to you, Rebecca, on that, since it mentions our old pal Bobby. So,
Yeah, very good. Yes, thank you for the question. And I think this is a really great question and something that we've been thinking about a lot. There's so many things happening in the food space right now that we are keeping up with. And one of them is a lot of issues that we've talked about for a really long time being promoted by Kennedy's followers or a lot of people who have helped Kennedy rise to his prominence. And so we have been steadfast in continuing to stick to the strong regulatory framework that we know needs to happen, especially around a lot of these food chemicals. So I mentioned that we're working on a piece of legislation to bring about all of these food chemical reforms that I mentioned. So it's really important that when there's a lot of narrative about the food system going on, and in individual food intake and all of those different things, that we're really strong on the proposals to remove these types of chemicals from our food system. So I'll start with that. The other thing is we're seeing, for example, Bobby Kennedy has talked about wanting to end the generally recognized as safe loophole. And this is a loophole that companies have used for a really long time. It was originally designed to help things like vinegar easily make it into our food system that we know is generally recognized as safe. But food chemical companies and food companies have used it to really pollute our food system. So he says that he wants to end that loophole. Our job is to continue to make sure that those policy points actually come out. And so what we've seen so far is that there's a lot of kind of lip service to those ideas, but our job as an organizing entity is to really push on and make sure that those policies actually happen. So that's kind of where I'll start us. I think there's been I mentioned also in my slides that there's been a push from some of Kennedy's followers. They're really upset about pesticides in our food system as well. And because of that, we've built a really strong bipartisan opposition actually to the riders that legislators have been trying to get passed in Congress to actually allow companies like Monsanto to continue to keep us in the dark about pesticides and pesticide exposure. So we've been able to really harness some of that energy and continue to push on the policies that we know we actually need because of some of the conversation that has arisen about our food system from Kennedy.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Alex, since this issue touches on getting victories in the face of Trump, and since a lot of those victories are coming at the state and local level, I don't know if you had anything you'd want to add to that.
Well, just that we've been able to to win at that level, right? So like I think, I mean it's not an accident that all the stuff I talked about was state and local. I think it's difficult to move anything through Congress and obviously even more difficult to move anything in this administration. But to me that's sort of par for the course. I mean, like the presidency goes back and forth. I've worked here 16 years, and every time there's a Republican in office or a Republican in control of Congress, there's a real limit to what you can do. I think what we've seen over and over again, though, is that really policy change often happens when you win at one state and then it goes to several more and then ultimately levels up to the federal level. And that's a frustratingly slow process, but it's like the world we're living in. And I think, there's still lots you can do at the state and local level. And in some ways, it's the level that's a little more, the scale is just a little bit easier from an organizing perspective anyhow. So starting at that level is often an easier lift for people because it's a little easier to think about your town than it is to think about affecting the federal government. So yeah, I think there's hope in all of that. And just to say, very often it doesn't stop there, right? It's like you win at one state and eventually you win the whole thing.
And we have just a couple of minutes free here again. Well, I guess we have a few more minutes than I thought. Jim, do you want to, yeah, you are working in Congress. Jim spends a lot of time talking to the Hill and doing things. And we don't want to give the impression that nothing is actually being accomplished because things are being accomplished. We are making some headway. So I don't know, Jim, if you want to touch on some of the ways that this isn't the first time we've faced a Republican administration or Republican Congress. So what are some of the sorts of things that we do that maybe aren't as, I'll go ahead and say sexy. They're not headline grabbing. That allow us to build, there is an election this year. We can't talk about that here because this is Food and Water Watch. But there is an election this year. There's going to be a new Congress next year. So what sorts of things are we really doing to build for that eventuality?
Well, one of the things that we face in Washington, D.C. is we are grossly outnumbered by the corporate lobbyists running around the Capitol. And that doesn't mean that we can't get our message through and we can't get it out there, but it means that we have to work with coalitions and volunteers around the country to make those voices heard. And so a lot of what work we're doing to further education of policymakers is, for instance, we held a training last week with a bunch of people around the country who are fighting data centers to teach them about speaking directly to their elected officials and how they can actually talk to them about the need for a moratorium on data centers. Earlier this year, we worked with our allies to put together a congressional briefing. We brought together former public utility commissioners, leaders in the environmental justice movement, leaders in the movements to protect local control, and brought folks together to actually talk to members of staff in congressional offices about the real issues and challenges that communities are facing because of data center development. And so by pairing this coordination and collaboration, we can move forward things like congressional letters, where we actually get members of Congress to put agencies on notice about that the public is aware of what they're doing and they're actually concerned about these efforts. We're working to introduce legislation and introducing bills that will stop the development and export of fossil fuels, that will stop the use of carbon dioxide for injection into oil wells, which is the fossil fuel industry's next phase of oil drilling. And together we're building a platform that people around the country can speak to and raise concerns in their communities so that when people are running for office, no matter what party they're with, no matter who they're with, they can see the support is there for these policies. And together with our collaboration of Work in the Hill and you out in the field all over the country, we can actually build real power and build real policies that will make a difference in our lives.
All right. Thank you, Jim. And we have time for one last question. And recognizing the number of New Yorkers on the call this evening and people from the Mid-Atlantic, I saw there was a question about Governor Hochul and the Nessie pipeline and what can be done with, or what is happening and what can be done with that. So I think either Tara and or Alex, I'm not sure which of you wants to. Neither one's hopping quickly. So I'm going to pick, oh, Tara, you went. Okay.
I can start, but Alex can talk about the great organizing work that our New York and New Jersey teams are doing to fight this resurrected project. So on the legal front, we have a number of lawsuits underway to complement the organizing campaign to stop this pipeline. We are, with allies, suing the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for issuing its certificate of approval for the pipeline. And so that will be moving forward in federal court. We will argue about, the inadequate environmental review that FERC conducted before greenlighting this project, and that it's not necessary under another federal law called the Natural Gas Act. We also have 2 additional federal lawsuits because unfortunately, both New York and New Jersey issued the Clean Water Act, what's called a 401 certification, which is kind of the state approval, finding that the project won't have too much of a harmful impact on the state's waterways. So unfortunately, both of those 401 certifications have been issued, and we are challenging them both in separate federal lawsuits.
All right. Thank you, Tara. And Alex, you got about 30 to 45 seconds if you want to add in.
I mean, only that it's shameful that Hochul approved it. People might remember we killed this in 2020 and then again in 21 and 22. It's absurd and crazy that she gave to Trump to do it. And I think, if there's any attempt to show rage about that, it would be helpful. But yeah, it's really awful. And we did throw a lot of organizing work into it and to no avail. So I think that's really damaging. And she's had kind of a series of really bad climate decisions. So it's worth knowing that.
This is true. And, I was just thinking, as you mentioned, Alex, how long you've been here. We have close to 100 years of Food and Water Watch experience on this panel tonight for a 21-year-old organization. That's not bad. We've seen these zombie projects come back, and we continue to beat them again and again and again, and we're going to keep working to beat this one. I just want to thank all of my colleagues for joining us here tonight. So a big thank you to Rebecca, Mary, Jim, Tara, and Alex for taking time out of your evening to come and join us. I want to thank everybody who had a question for us. Sorry, we can't get to every question that's asked, but we will try to follow up with each of you as we can. And I see some of that has been going on in the chat already. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for asking questions. Now, before you all go, I have a few closing announcements and reminders. First, as we've said, this all takes an incredible amount of people power. We're up against giant challenges every day. But as you heard tonight, we will continue to fight big ag handouts, protect clean and affordable water, oppose data centers and fossil fuel infrastructure, and slow Trump's agenda in the courts. And we'll keep winning at the state and local level. We couldn't do any of this without you. And if you would like to increase the impact we can have, please consider making a donation today. Again, we don't take any corporate funding. We are not beholden to corporate interests. Our interest is in the health of our communities and our planet, and our support comes from people like you. We organize people power to fight back against corporate power. And thank you so much for your generosity. Now, a reminder, next month, Food and Water Watch will be taking a break from Livable Future Live, but keep an eye out for the invitation to Food and Water Action's webinar on the midterm elections. Also, You can sign up for future Livable Future Live events at the link in the chat. And also, again, if you're in New York City on Wednesday, April 29th, and you are able to join us, please come to our in-person benefit, Against All Odds, Illustrating Activism. And if you aren't able to join us in New York, you can still join us on Thursday, May 14th, for our virtual benefit, which again will be joined by former U.S. Poet Laureate Ada Limol. Now, lastly, please consider taking a short survey that will pop up on your screen in a minute. We'd love to know what you thought of this event, how we can make it even better, and what kind of speakers and topics you'd like to hear from and about in the future. And as a bonus, we will be sending out a Food and Water Watch blanket to 5 of you who fill out this survey today. So if you fill out the survey, you'll be entered into a chance to get one of 5 Food and Water Watch blankets. So to wrap things up, I just wanted to thank you again for joining us here tonight. Please watch your email inboxes as we'll be sending out the recording of this event tomorrow, along with all of the resources we shared tonight. Take care. See you all next time. Onwards.